The room buzzed with forced laughter and the clinking of crystal glasses, but all I could hear was the jagged edge of my father's voice slicing through the air like a viper's strike. "Look at you scrambling in some dead-end job you call a career," he sneered. Eyes locked on me with that familiar mixture of disdain and disappointment. Around us, relatives nodded awkwardly, their smiles tight and unsure, as if wincing at the venom in his words. I sat frozen, the weight of his scorn pressing down heavier than any shame I'd ever known. My chest tightened, and my fingers clenched the napkin on my lap until the fabric threatened to tear. "You always thought you'd be something special," he continued, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "But here you are, barely scraping by, chasing dreams that will never pay the bills." His words echoed louder than the murmurs in the room. A public spectacle designed to humiliate me in front of family and friends. I glanced at my mother sitting quietly across the table, her lips pressed into a thin line, eyes darting away from the scene unfolding. She said nothing as usual. The grand dining hall, with its polished oak and glittering chandeliers, felt colder than I ever remembered. This was supposed to be a celebration, my birthday a milestone, but instead it had become a trial I never anticipated. I swallowed hard, feeling the heat rise to my cheeks and the sting of tears threatening to break through the dam of my resolve. Yet, beneath the surface of embarrassment, a flicker of something else sparked. A fierce determination that refused to be smothered. "Maybe if you had taken a real path like your cousins, you wouldn't be wasting everyone's time," he added, turning his gaze to the rest of the room as if awaiting their agreement. The room was silent but for the faint shuffle of feet and the uneasy clearing of throats. I could feel the eyes of my uncles, aunts, even distant cousins piercing me, weighing my worth by his cruel judgment. I clenched my jaw and forced myself to stand, the chair scraping sharply against the marble floor. "Enough," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor I felt inside. The room fell into a hush, all attention snapping back to me like a taut wire. "I'm proud of the choices I've made," I continued, voice gaining strength with every word. "I'm building something real, something that matters to me. And I won't let anyone, especially not my own father, belittle that." My father's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of irritation. "You think success comes from dreams? It comes from legacy, from connections, things you clearly don't have." His words were meant to cut deeper, but I was already beyond the reach of his venom. I gathered my composure, the room still watching, some faces softening, others stiffening in disapproval of my defiance. "Legacy is earned, not handed down," I said quietly, the fire in my chest now blazing openly. "And I intend to earn mine on my own terms." With that, I turned sharply and left the table, the murmurs following me like shadows in the grand hallway. I could hear Quinn's footsteps behind me, quick and steady, but I didn't look back. The cold air in the foyer hit my face as I pushed open the heavy front door and stepped out into the night, the city lights a distant promise against the dark sky. Quinn caught up to me on the steps, his hand brushing mine gently. "Don't let him get to you," he urged quietly, his eyes filled with concern. "He doesn't understand what you're capable of." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I know. But this is just the spark I need." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding and met his gaze. "I'm going to prove him wrong. Not just for me. For all the times he made me feel small." Quinn squeezed my hand, his support steady and unwavering. "Then let's get to work." As we walked away from the house, leaving behind the echoes of my father's cruel laughter, I felt something else rising inside me. A fierce resolve to rewrite the story he tried to write for me. The humiliation was a sting, yes, but it was also the ignition of a fire that would burn brighter than his contempt ever could. That night, back in my small apartment, I sat at the desk cluttered with notebooks and business plans, the soft glow of my laptop screen illuminating my determined face. I opened a fresh document and began to type, each word a brick laid in the foundation of the future I was building. The sting of my father's words lingered, but they no longer held power over me. Instead, they fueled a drive I had never tapped before. I thought back to every dismissive glance, every harsh word, every moment I'd been told I was less than enough. They were the shadows I was stepping out of, the past that would no longer define me. I wasn't just chasing a dream. I was crafting a legacy of my own making. The hours slipped by unnoticed, and as dawn tinged the sky pink, I finally leaned back in my chair, exhausted but alive with purpose. The journey ahead would be long and grueling, but for the first time, I welcomed the challenge. My father's public humiliation was no longer a wound. It was the spark that would set my world on fire. And I was ready to rise from the ashes. The months that followed were a relentless blur of early mornings and late nights, of endless meetings and sleepless brainstorming sessions. I poured every ounce of energy into my work, the sting from that humiliating night still fresh but transforming into a fuel I could never have imagined. The small startup I had founded was no longer just a project. It was becoming a force, and I was determined to carve my name into the industry with every strategic move and bold decision. Each morning I stepped into my modest office, the hum of the city outside a constant reminder that the world was moving fast, and I had to move faster. The narrow windows framed the skyline where glass towers stretched upward, symbols of power and legacy that I was bent on challenging. My team, a scrappy group of young professionals hungry for success, matched my pace and vision. Together, we dismantled obstacles and rebuilt ideas, turning innovative concepts into tangible products that began to catch the attention of investors and clients alike. I could feel the shift happening slowly but undeniably. Our revenue charts climbed steadily, and the buzz around our company grew louder. Invitations to industry events replaced the polite dismissals I had once endured. I was no longer the girl from a dead-end job, but a rising star whose name was spoken with respect, sometimes even awe. Despite the progress, my father's voice hadn't left my mind. It was a ghost that haunted the edges of every achievement, a reminder of the gulf I was determined to widen between his world and mine. Every critical email I sent out, every contract I signed, was a quiet defiance against the man who had tried to define my worth by his narrow standards. One afternoon, as I presented a new marketing strategy to a room full of potential investors, I caught myself scanning the faces for signs of doubt or condescension. Instead, I saw nods of approval, eyes bright with interest, and hands poised to write checks that would fuel the company's next phase. It was a validation I hadn't dared hope for in that dark moment at the family gathering. But success wasn't just about numbers or applause. It was a battle fought in boardrooms and behind closed doors, often against people who underestimated me because of my background. I learned to armor myself in confidence, to anticipate the subtle smirks and veiled skepticism that came with being the underdog. More than once I caught colleagues whispering about how I'd lucked out, or had connections, dismissing the years of grinding work behind every deal. Quinn stood by me through it all, a steady pillar in the chaotic storm. His belief in me was unshakable, even when I doubted myself. "You're not just changing the game," he told me one night as we sat in our cramped living room, the city lights flickering through the window. "You're rewriting the rules." I smiled, exhausted but energized. "It's more than that. I'm proving that the past doesn't dictate the future. That success isn't about where you start. It's about how far you're willing to go." The tension between my growing career and my father's dismissive legacy simmered beneath the surface, an unspoken challenge that I carried with me every day. My relatives, once so quick to echo his criticisms, began to ask questions about my work, seeking invitations to events or introductions to my growing network. I kept my distance, wary of their sudden interest, careful not to let old wounds reopen. One evening, as I prepared for a major presentation that could secure a pivotal contract, my phone buzzed with a message from my cousin, a man I barely spoke to since that fateful dinner. "Heard about your latest project. Impressive. Maybe you're not such a failure after all." I stared at the screen, the words a bitter reminder of the family I was trying to outgrow. I didn't reply. Instead, I focused on the task at hand. The next day, I stood before the potential clients, my voice steady and assured as I laid out the vision of a company that was more than a business. It was a statement. We weren't just competing. We were reshaping the landscape, breaking barriers that had long defined who belonged and who didn't. Months turned into years. The company grew under my leadership, each milestone a quiet triumph over the doubts and dismissals that had once surrounded me. I watched as my team expanded, welcoming new talent who shared the same hunger and drive. We adapted, innovated, and thrived, turning the startup into a respected player in a cutthroat market. Throughout it all, I never forgot the night that sparked this fire. My father's words had been a cruel catalyst, but they had also forced me to confront my own insecurities and rise above them. I wasn't just climbing the ladder for myself. I was setting a new standard for what was possible, for anyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. Quinn and I often talked about the future, imagining what life would be like when the company reached the heights we dreamed of. He believed in building a legacy that wasn't bound by old money or outdated expectations, one founded on merit and vision. Together, we planned a future where respect was earned through hard work, not inherited through birthright. But the closer I got to the top, the more palpable the tension became. I knew that sooner or later, my path would cross directly with my father's world, where old loyalties and power played by different rules. The thought gnawed at me, but I refused to let it shake the foundation I was building. One afternoon, I received an unexpected call from a mutual acquaintance, someone who worked at my father's company. "They're talking about you," the voice on the other end said, a mix of surprise and grudging respect. "Your name keeps coming up in board meetings. They say you're shaking things up." I smiled, the thrill of recognition mingling with a steely resolve. The gap between us was growing, not just in achievements but in influence. I was no longer the daughter dismissed at family dinners. I was a force to be reckoned with, a leader whose rise was impossible to ignore. As I hung up, I felt the weight of what was to come. The journey wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But I was ready. Years of relentless work had sharpened my resolve and honed my skills. The humiliation of the past was now the foundation of my strength. And this time I would dictate the terms of our next encounter. The morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the sleek conference room, casting long shadows across the polished table where the board had gathered. The air was thick with anticipation, and something else, a tension that prickled at the edges of my skin as I stepped forward. Today was the day everything shifted. The day I no longer stood in the shadow of my father's judgment but took my place as his superior. I glanced across the room, my eyes locking onto the figure seated at the far end, my father. His posture was rigid, a mask of confidence plastered over what I suspected was disbelief. The man who had once dismissed me in front of family and friends now sat beneath me, in a hierarchy I had fought tooth and nail to reach. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Good morning," I began, my voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. The room fell silent, all eyes on me. "As you know, following the recent restructuring, I've been appointed as the new head of our division. Today marks the beginning of a new chapter for this company." My father's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of resistance flashing before he masked it with a polite nod. "I trust you understand the responsibilities this role entails," he said, his tone edged with a challenge. "And the standards we uphold." I met his gaze steadily. "I do. And I intend to exceed them." The first meeting was a test of wills, a subtle dance of power beneath the veneer of professionalism. My father's initial smirks and condescending remarks were met with measured responses, a reminder that I wasn't here to play the role he expected. When he questioned my decisions or strategies, I countered with data and well-reasoned plans, each rebuttal a statement of my competence. There was a moment early in the meeting when he voiced doubt about one of my proposals, an innovative approach that deviated from the company's traditional methods. His words were laced with skepticism, as though daring me to fail. "I appreciate your perspective, but the market is evolving," I said firmly. "Sticking to old ways won't keep us competitive. We need to adapt, or we risk falling behind." The room was still, the weight of my words settling over the board members. My father's expression tightened, a flicker of something I hadn't seen before, uncertainty. For the first time, he was the one on the defensive. As the meeting progressed, the power dynamic subtly shifted. My father's confident demeanor chipped away under the pressure of my leadership and my clear vision. I wasn't just a subordinate anymore. I was the one steering the ship. When the discussion turned to resource allocation, I made a decisive call that directly impacted his projects. His surprise was palpable, a silent acknowledgement that the rules had changed. By the end of the meeting, the board members had rallied behind me, their questions and comments signaling support rather than doubt. I closed the session with a clear directive: innovation, accountability, and respect for every team member's contribution. As everyone began to leave, my father lingered, his eyes searching mine. "You've changed," he said quietly, a hint of grudging respect in his voice. I didn't expect this. I allowed myself a small, confident smile. Neither did I, once upon a time. Later, as I packed up my things in the quiet of my new office, Quinn's text buzzed on my phone. Asterisk proud of you. You've earned this. Asterisk. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of the moment settling over me. This was more than a professional victory. It was a personal triumph, the culmination of years of struggle and perseverance. But I knew this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be filled with challenges, especially navigating the complex emotions between my father and me. Yet, for the first time, I felt the scales had tipped in my favor. I was no longer the girl he dismissed. I was the leader he had to answer to. The weeks following my first meeting as my father's superior were marked by a subtle but profound shift in the office atmosphere. The once tense undercurrents began to smooth into a tentative respect. My father, though far from fully transformed, started shedding pieces of his old arrogance, replaced by an unfamiliar humility that I recognized as the first step toward acceptance. Our encounters became less about confrontation and more about cautious understanding. In one of our private meetings, he arrived looking less like the imposing figure I remembered and more like a man grappling with the reality of change. His eyes held a quiet vulnerability as he spoke. I underestimated you. I see that now. I met his gaze, the years of bitterness softening into something more empathetic. It wasn't easy for me either, I admitted. But I'm not here to erase the past. I want us to build something better. Together. He nodded slowly, the weight of his pride visibly lifting. I want to learn, he said. Not just about the business but about you. About how we can move forward. That moment marked the beginning of a fragile truce between us. I balanced firmness with empathy, setting clear boundaries while remaining open to rebuilding trust. I insisted on transparency and mutual respect, qualities that had been absent in our relationship for far too long. Slowly, the walls he had built around his ego began to crumble, revealing a man capable of change. The workplace itself responded to this new dynamic. My leadership style, grounded in collaboration and innovation, breathed fresh energy into the team. Projects that had stagnated under old management gained momentum, fueled by renewed enthusiasm and a shared sense of purpose. The board noticed the positive turnaround, and morale soared. One afternoon, as I walked through the office, I overheard a conversation between two employees. It's like night and day, one said. We actually feel heard now. There's a real leader at the helm. I smiled quietly to myself, knowing how far we'd come. Outside the office, the personal rift between my father and me began to heal, though cautiously. Family gatherings became less fraught, the sharp edges of past conflicts dulled by time and effort. My mother, who had long borne the silent burden of our feud, finally found relief in the tentative peace. Quinn remained my steadfast partner throughout, his unwavering support a constant source of strength. One evening, as we shared a quiet dinner, he reached across the table and took my hand. You've done more than you realize, he said softly. You've changed not just the company but your family. I squeezed his hand, the warmth of his words settling deep in my chest. It's been the hardest thing I've ever done, I confessed. But I'm beginning to see that respect, real respect, isn't about power or titles. It's about understanding and trust. As the months passed, I balanced my role as a decisive leader with the delicate task of nurturing our renewed relationship. It wasn't always easy. Old habits and wounds resurfaced unexpectedly, but each challenge was met with a commitment to growth and forgiveness. At work, the company thrived under this new ethos. We launched innovative products, expanded our market reach, and fostered a culture that valued every voice. The success was tangible, but what mattered most was the transformation beneath the surface, a testament to the power of perseverance and empathy. One afternoon, as I prepared for a major presentation, my father stopped by my office unannounced. He handed me a folder, his expression earnest. I've been reviewing your proposals, he said. Impressive work. I want to support you fully. I looked up, surprised by the sincerity in his eyes. Thank you, I replied. That means more than you know. He smiled, a genuine warmth breaking through the years of tension. I'm proud of you, he said quietly. In that moment, I felt the past's heavy chains finally loosen. The journey from humiliation to respect was far from over, but the path was clear. Together, we were building something new, one grounded not in old expectations, but in mutual regard and shared ambition. As I closed the door behind him, I allowed myself a small, victorious smile. The barriers had been broken, and a healthier, stronger bond was taking root. This was more than professional success, it was personal redemption. And it was just the beginning. The memory of that first meeting, the one where my father's smug confidence crumbled under the weight of my authority, remained etched in my mind, a silent reminder of how far I had come. The expression on his face then, a mixture of shock and reluctant respect, was a symbol of the lessons learned and barriers broken. It was the moment when the scales tipped, and I stepped fully into the role I had fought so hard to claim. Sitting in my office, the city skyline stretching beyond the window, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The humiliations endured in that grand dining hall, the countless hours of work, the battles fought in boardrooms and in my own heart, all had forged a resilience I could never have imagined. The past no longer held power over me. Instead, it had become the foundation of my strength. The evolving relationship with my father mirrored the transformation within the company. Where once there had been tension and dismissal, now there was cautious respect and a tentative partnership. He had learned that respect isn't inherited. It's earned through perseverance, integrity, and vision. And I had learned that success wasn't just about titles or profits. It was about breaking free from old narratives and defining one's own worth. Quinn stood beside me throughout, his unwavering belief a beacon in the darkest moments. Together, we had built more than a company. We had built a future unshackled from the past. Our love had grown stronger through adversity, a testament to the power of support and shared dreams. The family, too, began to heal. My father's softened demeanor allowed bridges to be rebuilt, and the once strained gatherings became opportunities for genuine connection. The cycle of judgment and shame was replaced by understanding and acceptance. Looking ahead, I saw endless possibilities, not just in business but in life. The legacy I was creating wasn't one of inherited privilege but of earned respect, hard-fought victories, and the courage to rise above. The garbage, as they say, had taken itself out, leaving behind fertile ground for new beginnings. As I prepared for the next chapter, I carried with me the lessons of the past, the pain, the determination, the growth. They were the threads woven into the fabric of who I had become. And with each step forward, I honored that journey, knowing that true power lay not in tearing others down but in lifting oneself up. The future was mine to shape, and I embraced it with open arms and an unbreakable spirit. If you loved the story, like the video and subscribe.